esteemed people, the chairperson of the Sisulu Foundation for Social Justice and the directors, you are welcome. The leadership of the VUT University of Technology, you are welcome. The esteemed guests who are here. This afternoon, we're going to have an experience and a half when we learn and we hear about the story of the Sisulu family. Ntate Walter le Me Albertina Sisulu, particularly Walter Sisulu's life story and what it symbolized. And we'll be hearing from our esteemed guest, special guest, Professor Alan Busak. I'll tell you more about the program in a while, but for now I think it is appropriate that we all rise up to sing the national anthem. And then once we've opened our road that way, then we and talk further. The choir, you lead us in song. Thank you very much to the VUT choir for a wonderful rendition of our national anthem there, as well as the earlier performance, I must say, which got the elders who are sitting here in front fully charged. And I nearly made a mistake of asking you to continue singing, but I remembered that we were not here to have a wonderful time, as positive as it is, but I suppose the elders that we have come to acknowledge and respect here this afternoon will be pleased in the heavens above when they see that the new generation is as energetic, as enthusiastic as what they fought for and what they aspired to. Mayor Lindiwe Sisulu, thank you very much for being with us this afternoon and giving some of us the opportunity to be part of this wonderful story, celebration of the legacy of your parents. And for me, personally, Tim Modise, I'm very much privileged and honored to be here because I've got a little story to tell as well in passing. That I heard about Tate Walter Sisulu when I was still a youngster. He was one of the legendary figures we heard about, but never saw his picture, never got to know who he is. Until upon his release, I had the privilege of being one of the first people to interview him in 1989. And therefore, duly prepared to understand what transpired in 1990 and since then. So it was, I don't know what they call it, but providence, I think, Dr. Busak, you would know those words, that's when there's that unusual intervention. So from then on, I got to interact with the old man, but the story is bigger than what I'm telling today. Professor Kehla Ndlovu, you are our host on behalf of the VAL University of Technology Vice Chancellor and Principal. Please welcome your guests. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Sanbonan. Ladies and gentlemen, it is with deep humility and profound gratitude that I welcome you all to the inaugural Walter Sisulu Memorial Lecture, hosted in partnership with the Sisulu Foundation for Social Justice. This afternoon, and probably towards the evening, hope not, or hopefully so, we are gathered not for the ceremony, but for something far more enduring, a collective remembering that seeks to honor the past while shaping the path ahead. Allow me to first observe protocol and acknowledge the presence of our honored guests, the Sisulu family, with special recognition to Dr. Lindiwe Nongceba Sisulu, patron of the foundation, Mr. Mpumzi Ntegazi, Chief Executive Officer of the Sisulu Foundation for Social Justice, our keynote speaker, the Reverend Dr. Alan Busak, a moral giant of our times. Professor Male Khapule William Makhoba, former Vice Chancellor and Principal of University of KwaZulu-Natal, but also a distinguished scholar. Dr. Pali Lehohla, Deputy Chairperson of the Sisulu Foundation for Social Justice, ambassadors and dignitaries from Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, and Namibia. My colleague, Dr. Spish Nelane, Deputy Vice Chancellor, Research, Innovation, Commercialization, and Internationalization, and all academic colleagues, members of our council, members of our institutional forum, our Senate members, students, and of course, invited guests. If I have not mentioned you by name, please know that your presence is no less appreciated with all protocols observed, and every guest here is valued. I greet you all with deep respect. This afternoon, as we gather, not simply to honor the name, but to commune with the spirit, the quiet and resolute spirit of Walter Sisulu. He was, as history reminds us, not a man of flamboyance, but of principle. Not a man who sought the light, but one who carried it. He understood, a few ever do, that leadership is not about command, but about conscience. He once said, I quote, "We must treat our people with dignity and respect. We must listen to them and learn from them," unquote. In those few words lies the very foundation of a just society, and indeed the ethos we aspire to hear at VAL University of Technology. Through our collaboration with the Sisulu Foundation, we affirm our belief that universities are not ivory towers. They are instruments of social justice designed not to isolate, but to inspire action. This partnership is not symbolic, it is strategic, it is sincere, and it is urgent. We are proud to become custodians of this memorial lecture, not merely as an event on a calendar, but as an annual call to conscience. Tonight, we welcome not only a keynote address, but a keystone in the legacy that must live on. We welcome a gathering of minds, but also a gathering of memory. Walter Sisulu walked slowly with quiet steps, but the ground still shakes where he passed. He was the kind of man whose voice never had to be raised, because his integrity always spoke first. So, as we begin this evening's proceedings, let us not just our minds, but our hearts aside. So let us sit with the discomfort of injustice and rise with the conviction of transformation. Let this be more than a lecture. Let this be a moment of alignment with the ideals we dare not abandon. In alignment with the enduring legacy of Walter Sisulu, I am also pleased to announce that the university, working with the foundation, will soon launch a student essay competition, inviting our young thinkers to reflect on the values he stood for and how they resonate today. As I say, together with the foundation, we will work out the details of how this will work. We will communicate them in due course. This is our way of ensuring that this story continues to live through the voices of our next generations. To each of you here, I say thank you for your presence. May your spirits be stirred. May your convictions be deepened. And may Walter Sisulu's legacy continue to live, not just in memory, but in movement. I thank you. And welcome.
Thank you very much, Professor Kehlan Ndlovu, the Vice Chancellor and Principal of VUT, for your remarks. Now, Ntate Sisulu did leave certain ideas in our heads, and sometimes we question ourselves as individuals and wonder, why should we care when things go the wrong way? Because, you know, there's always the popular way and there's the other way. And the other way is that of doing things right. And I know that Dr. Alan Busak, you've got a lot to say about that. I just want to add to what Professor Ndlovu said, because Ntate Padi Lohota is a good friend of mine through exactly that responsibility of making sure that the voices of the people are heard. As much as he worked as the chief statistician in the country, and all the facts that were always given once, now and again rather, he gave content to those stats so that we can understand what type of society we are. But he's gone one step further in recent times. I've had numerous interactions with him randomly sometimes, and invited people. And he would come and would ask him questions about the state of education, the state of our communities, the economy, etc., etc. And he's been very generous in always sharing with us his insights. Ntate Lohota is the Deputy Chairperson of the Sisulu Foundation for Social Justice, and I'm inviting him to give us context to why we are here this afternoon, as well as the relationship that the university has with the Sisulu Foundation for Social Justice. Dr. Lohota.
Thank you very much. Let me align myself with the protocols that the Vice Chancellor has actually delivered. Suffice to recognize our patron, both the patron who is the daughter of Ndate Walter Sisulu, but she's much more than just being a daughter. I have been given a task, and you're asking me the question that I'll be talking here. By the way, she used to be my Minister of Public Administration, therefore my employer. So when I got a call that I should be a member of the board, I tried to say no. And I said no for many reasons. And Pumzi was the person who was talking to me at the time. So it was easy to say no to Pumzi, and for many reasons I said no, I'm not going to be. And then, you know Jonas, who was swallowed by the sheep, by the fish, and got spit. I think Pumzi had to go and collect the fish to swallow me. And then when I was spit, I woke up and I said, okay, I'll come and serve. More so that Reverend Busak was there to give religious counsel to ensure that I do so. So I really want to observe the protocols that we have given that, and also allow me to just go into my rendition. I have 3 messages to try and capture and draw some conclusions. The first message around Ndade Walter Sisulu and Mea Albertina, but through the voice of Ndade Walter, was one of hope. At all times when he talked about give people hope. If we think about this hope, just before the end of the World War, Second World War, they met with their president of the Youth League, Limbed. And the theme of the meeting was freedom in our lifetime. Limbed died before he reached 36 years of age. All the others who were in that meeting lived to see freedom in their lifetime. All of them. Owuor Tambo died 2 years before 1994. But all the people that were there, President Mandela, Ndade Mbeki, that is, they all lived to see that freedom in their lifetime. It wouldn't have been so if they didn't have hope. And the central pillar of this hope was Ndade Sisulu, because he continued to talk about that hope. On the 14th of July 1992, with O'Malley in an interview, O'Malley started by saying, in certain respects, that does not mean much. Hopelessness where there is hopelessness. I wonder these days whether we can differentiate hopelessness. I wonder these days whether we can differentiate between hope and hopelessness. And I think that Sisulu would have told us about who are those who are hopeless and those who actually render hope. He further talked about hope when he referred to the matter of the Umkhonto weSizwe, that in taking the arms struggle, it was driven by hope. And he had this to say about it. It was something we said in 1960 when we started Umkhonto weSizwe, and we still remark, we hope that the whites in this country will realize that before it is too late, the necessity of talking about the country's political situation is great. That before it is too late, the necessity of talking about the country's political situation is great. That was 1992. 33 years later, this rings as true as it rang 32 years ago. This message of hope. We have already spoken about the hopelessness of Botha anyway. And he talks about his meeting with de Klerk. And he says, no, my first meeting with de Klerk was when we met at Grooteskier, the first official meeting between the government and the ANC, which I always characterized as a meeting knowing the history of the country. There was nonetheless the hope that something may come out of it. He was a realist, that he hoped that something would come out of it. We are at a moment where we really need that hope. Where the country is, we need hope. But we also have to point to hopelessness, as he pointed to Botha at the time, that this one was hopeless. And indeed today, there are many who are hopeless, in positions of power. And I want to start with what happened 2 days ago in Parliament, because that marks the highest style and standard of hopelessness. Hopelessness in the thought processes that are empty in some of us. So a random businessman decides to cast aspersions to the data that Stats SA produces, which I had the privilege of building while Melindi was Minister of Public Service. She knows that organization. That organization is tough and does the right things. I digress a bit because when I was supposed to get my bonus, she decided at the time, and in fact I suggested to the fellow DGs that we shouldn't actually take bonus because the country was in trouble. It wouldn't have impacted a much, but it was symbolic that we wouldn't do that. Because where the country was, bonus was a no-no. Those are the kinds of decisions we could take. Coming back to Mr. Fourie of Capitec. 2 days ago, he was on some interview of sorts. I do not know who was interviewing him, but he caught the ire, he caught the attention of the ruling party. No other than Park Stau, who is supposed to be an industrialist, leading industrialization. And Fourie says unemployment in South Africa should be about 10%, because Stats SA doesn't measure informal sector. I hit my stack. I've never been that angry for this man who is aggregating the miserly pays of black people and aggregates it into the most successful, so-called most successful business person. And then trivializes the suffering of people who don't have jobs and say they can only be 10%. I want to go into this in detail so that we should understand what the meaning of the government of national unity is and what it cannot be. 73% of whites are in the top quintile. So their burden is only 27%. And in that burden, only 1%, 2%, 3% are the real burdens. Blacks, only 13% are in the top quintile. 27%, 87% are in the lower quintiles. So when you look at that constituency of the parliament, blacks are outnumbered completely by this 73%, who have only a burden of 20%. And the blacks, who are only 13% in terms of quintile income, in the top quintile, have a burden of 87%. The government of national unity, if it has consultative powers and equal attention, They'll never pass NHI. They'll never pass free education. They'll never pass anything that favors blacks. Because that equality of participation in parliament through the GNU undermines that principle. Where still, they are so few, 400 members of parliament, you can always buy them when you are 73% and you are in the top quintile. The balance of power is such that transformation cannot happen. We must understand that. That is why when Fourie says the unemployment in South Africa can only be 10%, it is echoed by Paxton, who I thought thinks a bit differently. And he says, yes, there's a say, you must look at the formula. Now, you do not fatten a cow by scaling it, putting it on different scales. You fatten it by feeding it. Not by saying, bring this scale, bring that scale. The destruction that does. And it was, they are choristas of Fourie. Fourie has put this thing, and then they go and regurgitate it in parliament and agree that blacks have 10% unemployment. Molefe tried to enlighten these parliamentarians. I mean, they are so dumb that they continued. And this lady who said these things and said some people don't need to work, don't like to work. I mean, I was so fired up that I could understand why they say what they say because of the architecture and the composition of the government of national unity. Because it could be allowed in that house that the ANC could continue on that narrative when 80% of their fellow relatives, 87%, are languishing in hunger and poverty. And they could try to sustain that madness. It cannot be right. This is when Dade Sisulu would have said, those who argue that way are as hopeless as water and cannot inspire hope. They cannot inspire hope. So I actually jumped on an interview immediately to dismiss this madness. The Statistician General came with an article that dismissed this madness. They said we don't measure informal sector. Of course, there's a say measures informal sector. I've been there. I measured it in 2005, in 2011, in 2016. And the Statistician General, current one, has measured it in 2019, and he measures the informal sector. We measure informal employment. 3 million people work in the informal sector. Those numbers come from the quarterly labor force survey. Those numbers also come from the survey of the self-employed, employers and self-employed, which looks at that number of the informal sector, which Fourie and Tau and their choristers say that we don't measure that. They have an institution that measures. They ignore it and cast aspersions to it. That is the sign of the hopeless. It's not those who actually inspire hope. Yesterday I was quite convinced, as I've argued all the time, that government doesn't use evidence. And because they don't use evidence, they cannot have sustained hope, which Sisulu and those around Lembede died, but the rest of them sustained that hope. They didn't sustain that hope, I almost said by prayer, not in front of the Reverend here, no. They sustained that hope both by fact and by prayer. They knew that that credo of freedom in their lifetime was going to be real. And it became real. Because they sustained that hope on the basis of material conditions that they could see. Even on the eve of 1990, Dade Sisulu says, Botha was hopeless, But de Klerk, I could see, he's a man that saw the future. In the first meeting that he had with de Klerk. So now, what is it that the government does with the informal sector? You know in that MTS, what happens there? Because we are there. So in the surveys that we have run of the informal sector at STEZ SA, hopeless, 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 hopeless. Banks don't come near 2% of credit extension. Government with ISMA, FISA, all these other things that they talk about all the time, what is called CEFA, call them. They even change their names. They don't come close to what is required. They are around 4% in the informal sector. The guys who succeed there are family, friends, and fools. Those are the people who provide resources for the informal sector. And then, of course, those who come tops are the machonistas. As for the banks, as for government, it's not even Capitec that provides funding to the informal sector. So for Fourie to come and talk the kind of nonsense he's talking infuriates one to the core and undermines the hope that Walter and Albertina Sisulu hoped for us. So what is the future? So what is the future? Albie Sachs says the following: we have secured the country, but we have not secured the society we wish for. And when we have this kind of inequities, of absence of investment in the informal sector, and suddenly expect and say that it is not measured by STEZ SA when we have not actually provided any resource to doubt or that give credence to the doubt that it cannot be measured, then we have hopeless people that cannot think. Absolutely cannot think. You must go and watch that debate in Parliament, where Molefe in the portfolio committee tries to explain. When this lady, Honorable the Rees left in there, says, no, some people don't want to work, and therefore the expanded definition should be expunged. Even when expunged, that will still have 32% unemployment. And for them to believe Fourie, who has aggregated, who has learned from VBS that we destroyed, because Fourie is not anything new except VBS. Those old ladies established their bank, took their children to school. One of them is the Vice Chancellor of the University of the United Nations, Marwala, from Venda. VBS was a bank built by women, the only black bank and women bank in South Africa. We have let it to die. Only glory, our only emblem of success. Itala is on the line. And there is Capitec, learning from the Stockwells, the experience of BBS. And this man becomes the best person before sliced bread and cheese. And has the audacity. We are not suffering enough. In fact, only 10% of us are not employed. Only 5% of whites in this country are not employed. Perhaps he's talking about that and not black people. It reflects what goes on in the boardroom, that the boardrooms are talking a different language altogether to what on the ground that the likes of Natem Tias sees every day. What happens in Umtata, that river, Umtata, It used to take people, that's why it has the name Tata, Mtatili, Mtata. Now it's an ocean that is taking people. So as I now sit down, let me go back to the 3 points. Hope anchored Ndade Sisulu and his comrades. That the commitment to freedom in the lifetime occurred, and that commitment they made to Lembed. Second, he actually discerned and detested hopelessness, and he could say that to Botha and say, this one is hopeless. In his grave, he is now knowing who those who are hopeless are. It is for us to point at them and say, you are hopeless. Then the legacy of Walter and Albertina will have been respected. Thank you very much.
Dr. Padile Hotla, thank you very much for your remarks, and straightforward, to the point, and as transparently as you are able to. And of course, as a man who uses facts and stats to buttress your point of view, you are the right man to make those remarks. Dr. Imtiaz Suleiman, I see you are here. For a moment, I suspected that you might have influenced my friend here to speak the way he's speaking. I'm not sure if you contributed somewhat to his remarks, but nevertheless, welcome. Always a pleasure to see you. And for those who may not know you, Dr. Imtiaz Suleiman is one of South Africa's important exports around the world, spreading goodwill and brotherhood through the work of the Gift of the Givers. We appreciate your work. And of course, you've got a lot of work. You've got a lot of work these days, given the floods that we have seen in the Eastern Cape. You've seen a lot of disasters and devastation in the country, but together with your colleagues and volunteers in your organization have always stepped up when our people needed you and wherever the world needed you. So welcome. I'm going to call on Dr. Speech Nelana, the Deputy Vice Chancellor, Research, Innovation, Commercialization and Internationalization. I've got a friend who works for the government. Whenever he's had a little too much to drink, he brags about being the hardest working government or public servant. We always laugh at the joke. We say, you say that, but it's only 4 o'clock in the afternoon. You are not in the office. You are already back home and you talk about. But be that as it may, he's the hardest working member of the executive of VUT, I would like to believe. With so many responsibilities, he'll be coming up here to introduce our keynote speaker. But before he does that, I'm going to call on a poet by the name of Umnikazi Wepen.
Bathi umnikazi wepeni isongolo lohlasela ngepeni abaye basongolo bahlasela ngemagama mshangane lokhuluma swade ticabhe khaba ngitala bangibita umthobisi ukuthi ngiyawuthoba inhlitiyo yete bamvu ngitala umndenini wakamdlovu bathi mathe mdlovu tiya kwini kawandlovu atluba mchila rengweni wankonzo kuluwa kungulube ngiphume endase emangweni enkomazi esigodini sasempumalanga lapho lephuma khona lilanga ungibala ngelibala lami ukuthi cha ngiyatichenya ngebumnyama bami ngumnikazi lo wafika eVUT 2024 washiya umlando ngefirst day yakhe mnikazi lo waphuma VUT number 2 ku VUT Got Talent bamshala tanda bathi mnikazi yasabele matalent alafana nawakho ayaswela esiveni umnikazi lo bhandishe bambu phela ngale nkulu injabulo phela emanceba uyawapholisa phela lapho lavela khona phela ushiya bambaphilile embhalweni phela umnikazi wepelo anyakatisa bambu phela eVUT phela wafika eboardroom manyakatisa phela bodokotela nabo professor washiya bamangele bathi umnikazi lona lo washiya bambajabulile phela umnikazi wepeni mashiya kujabule bambu bathi songodlo uyasabela bathi vula indlebe takho ulalele kudla kwemphefemulo ngani mina ngitakuphilisa phela ngembhalo yami ngiyaphilisa angisuye dokotela ngeticu kepha ngemagama ngingidokotela vula indlebe takho ulalele phela ngani ngita ngalo lelulwimi lesimvu phela ngitakunika phela lelwati phela nekubaleka kwesive lesiya kuso naleli lesibuya kuso. Let's go my selector. Let's go, let's go, let's go. I greet you all. Dumelang. Arupelini. Vari dimategwani. I don't know all the languages. Will forgive me. I'm still waiting for the technical team that side. I don't know what they are preparing. Sorry for the delay a little bit. Let's go. Sukusele emuva lapho lesiqhamuka khona phela nanoma bengekho hlala phasi phela ulalele nanayi inzaba phela bekumadima lemuva abafunzi balwela inkululeko phela ngani baholwa ngilo mdzala phela ngqomvongqomvo phela labo yebebambita ngamashaya phela ngani phela mafika phela bamvu bekabahola ngeliqiniso phela ngani bazama kumvalela bavala nemlomo wakhe kepha inhlitiyo nemoya wakhe ngete bawuvala phela bathi wafika ngalikhulu buhlakani phela nga1912 phela wafika wanyathela emhlabeni kwavakala tigidi endlovu kwavakala ukuthi cha seyifikile inkosi phela vula tindlebe takho namhla ngite ngitawukhuluma ngeliqhawe phela latalwa ngekho emhlabeni labuye lahamba emhlabeni ngekho phela kepha namhla vula tindlebe phela ulalele lo mlayeto lenginika ngilabadzala phela balokhu bawufafatha kimi phela bekumadima le emuva bazama kumvalela ejele phela walokhu phela aqhubeka nalo phela le ANC phela aloku ayihola ngemandla nangenkulu injabulo phela wakhipha konke phela lebekathe kumsinza phela wayalwela lenkululeko phela lwela bamvu labamnyama phela nesive ukuthi sikhululeke phela the freedom that we need, the freedom that we are ngitawukhuluma ngelive. I'm here to talk about the freedom that they were talking about. I'm asking myself, what is freedom? I can't get even that definition of freedom because each and every day I get new and new explanation from different people. Explain to me, what is freedom? I don't know freedom. What is freedom? I am born free, but deep inside, I'm not free. I'm even scared to finish the degree I'm doing because after that, I'm thinking I'm going to sit down at home without unemployment. I'm even scared. I'm even scared to go outside there and expose myself because here in these days when we are doing writing and telling the truth, after some few days or few years we are dying. Where we are going, it's still painful to us. Ask yourself, don't think for your family only, but think even for yourself that tomorrow you need to work for this thing. It's not about you. It's not about your family. It's not about your village. It's not about anyone. It's not about the township, your city, or your country. It's about the world. Let's take politics to the world. Teach us each and everything, each and every aspect that we need to know. Because without this, we're not going anywhere. We need to walk freely and happy, knowingly very well that we are going to the greener pastures. Let us lead the youth. A lot of youth outside there, they are staying, they are drinking alcohol each and every day without knowledge on what they are going to do. They are just happy with those peanuts they are getting every month end. Because we are living in a nice country where they babysit us from child grant after child grant. It's SRT, it's stressful, distress grant. After that, it's old age grant. We are living in that country where to live or to breathe, you are earning something. If you are not working, you are earning that 370 each and every day. We are living in that country whereby people can try to go outside there and show their talent, but they are oppressed by the political leaders. We are living in that country where people are trying to push away every truth that are coming to them, trying to accommodate everything that benefits them. We are living in that country. We are not free yet. The freedom, we are still fighting for it. Even in 1994, the only thing that we are free on is to vote. But a lot of youth are staying there, back there, during the voting days, drinking alcohol each and every day because that is the thing they think about. The rate of smoking drug, the rate of drugs in the country already expanded. I was frightened yesterday when I scroll in my social media platforms and then I found police officers, they were involved in the drug transport and everything. I was even scared what they are going to do because we are not yet safe. The people that were supposed to lead us, they are pushing us away. The people that were supposed to make us to row and show the nation what we got, they are pushing us away. We got gold, platinum, you can count endless. But we are not living in a good country. This is the healing voice of Mligas Wepi. Asiqhubeka soyibona impilo abaphile abantu embhalweni. Thank you. Nakhensa mina.
Likutlwetse akere. We can't repeat or translate or try to say anything further than that. That's the voice from the youth. Umnikazi wepen. And I think he said it in a much more politer way than some of his cohorts or peers would say. But I'm pleased that, it's as open as that. Let's speak the truth. Deputy Vice Chancellor, Research, Innovation, Commercialization, Internationalization, Dr. Speech Nalana, please come forward to introduce our keynote speaker.
Molweni. Good evening. I'll stand on our develop or established protocol, but I want to acknowledge our patron, Dr. Sisulu, and my Vice Chancellor, and members of management and the board members of the Sisulu Foundation, and my friend, the CEO, Mr. Mtakazi. I acknowledge you. I'm honored to be standing here to introduce one of the giants of our struggle. It was a very short CV, but I think it's very short. You should have made it longer. But let me start. Professor Alan Aubrey Boesak studied theology at the Theological Seminary of the Dutch Reformed Mission Church at the University of the Western Cape. He was ordained in Emmanuel Dutch Reformed Mission Church in Paarl in 1968 at the age of 22. In 1970, he studied advanced studies at the Theological University at Kampen in the Netherlands and was awarded the doctor's degree in theology in June 1976. A week after the Soweto uprisings, he returned to South Africa to become a chaplain to students at the University of the Western Cape, Peninsula Technikon, Belleville Teachers College, and then he was a minister at the Belleville Dutch Reformed Mission Church. Dr. Boesak served the church in various ecumenical events. In October 2017, Yale University Divinity School hosted him as the layman Beecher lecturer, its most prestigious lectureship series. Dr. Boesak's involvement in public life and South Africa's freedom struggle began in 1976, with his leading role in the resistance politics in South Africa. In 1983, he called for the formation of the United Democratic Front, UDF, which would grow into the largest non-violent, non-racial anti-apartheid formation in the history of the struggle. A fervent believer in direct, militant, non-violent action, it became its most visible leader, home and abroad, that is UDF. He worked with President Nelson Mandela, Archbishop Tutu, Reverend Frank Chikane, Reverend Piers Nodier, and the whole array of African and world leaders to end apartheid. Professor Boesak is a recipient of 14 honorary doctoral degrees. I repeat, Prof. Boesak is a recipient of 14 honorary doctoral degrees and more than 20 international awards. Among those are the Robert Kennedy Human Rights Award, the Champion for Justice Award from the Indiana Center for Middle East Peace, the Martin Luther King Jr. Peace Award from the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, Atlanta, Georgia, USA, and closer to home, a King Hintsa Bravery Award from the Xhosa Royal House. Recently, he was inducted into the Martin Luther King Jr. International Board of Preachers at Morehouse College, Atlanta, Georgia, the only African thus far to have been afforded that honor. Can we? Prof. Vusak is an award-winning author of 24 books. His most recent publications include Furrows of Both Sides of the Blood Red Waters, Prophetic Critique of Empire Resistance, Justice and the Power for Hopeful Sizwe, Children of Waters of Meribah, Black Liberation Theology, the Miriamic Tradition and the Challenges of the 21st Century Empire, that was published in 2019, Selfless.
And Moderator Mudi said these are these points. They did so most vividly in the courageous rising of our people in the Defiance campaign, in which Walter Sisulu's role in planning and preparation and execution, alongside colleagues such as Oliver Tambo and Nelson Mandela, was absolutely crucial. They did so also in our people's times, was just a month away. Both men understood that they were in a struggle. For Macmillan, this was the struggle for Western capitalist imperial hegemony. And more than guns or bombs, the thing that frightened Macmillan most was, quote, the strength of this African nationalism. Hence his warning to white South African power. Quote, the struggle is joined and it is a struggle for the minds of men. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is the heart of the legacy of Walter Sisulu, which this university now claims as its mission, the struggle for the reawakened, conscientized, liberated, humanized, and decolonized African mind. Even a cursory glance at the Western commentaries on that famous Winds of Change speech by the British Prime Minister confirms one major point of consensus. It is the British government between 1945 and 1951 under the Labour Party that had on its own initiated the decolonization process in Africa and Asia. That process was briefly interrupted by the Conservative Party rule until Helen Macmillan's leadership, who then again took up that noble European cause of letting Africa's people go. Western media, in essence, political analysts and academics claim that it is the British Empire's magnanimity whose blessing on African and Asian liberation movement made independence possible. Hence, we can find even a sentence such as this, quote, the British government and the Labour Party use had initiated a process of decolonization. Not a word about African and Asian agency, initiative, or struggle. But that is what happens when one's lens is consistently and sometimes blindly Eurocentric. We know, as these Eurocentric minds also do, that what was called independence was not ever granted or initiated by the ruling classes of white imperialist colonialist societies. It was always a struggle, it was always a fight, and sometimes to the death. And it really did not start in 1945, as they claim. India's fight for independence began at least as early as 1857 with the Indian Rebellion. And Mahatma Gandhi's historic Salt March, perhaps the decisive moment and onslaught against British rule in India, happened in 1930. For Malaysia, 1857 is also a historic marker in their struggles for independence, with the uprising of the workers against the gold mining companies in Britain. In Kenya, there was resistance almost from the moment of colonization in 1920, and organized resistance through the Mau Mau started in 1942. The Mau Mau rebellion of 1952 to 1960 simply further debunks the lie of 1945. South Africa's struggle against imperialist invasion began in 1510. The winds of change might have been blowing through Africa and Asia, but it was imperial power, imperial political and economic interest, and the empire's needs and desires that set out to control the strength, the direction, and the effect of those winds. Those Africans who understood the truth understood also that this was not a time for unbridled celebration, for genuflecting in gratitude to imperialists and colonialists for the condescension of letting them raise their own flags in their own countries. They understood that those winds of change would be met with fierce opposition if disguised as breezes of deception, namely colonialist adaptations, fraudulent independent pacts, spider webs of international rules they did not control, the optics of power, divide and rule tactics fueled by greed, and the politics of internal betrayal, ourselves against ourselves. The recognition of the new phase of struggle, the shaping of a different vision for Africa, with different consequences for our people at home and in the world, is what I mean by headwinds of freedom. Those headwinds sometimes blow quite strongly, sometimes they subside, and then they rise again, but they never completely die down. And there are many reasons for my admiration of that singularly influential Indian social scientist and Christian lay theologian M.M. Thomas, since I began to read him in the early 1970s. One reason is that he wrote early in the 1950s about the winds of change in Asia and Africa that Macmillan would be talking about a decade later. These are not mere rebellions or uprisings or civil disobedient actions, Thomas argued. These are, in fact, revolutions. They are revolutions in response to the people's demand for power. Though not power for power's sake, as politicians these days are openly bragging about, but power, quote, as the bearer of dignity and for the significant and responsible participation in society and in social history by the people. In other words, a people's power to enable them to claim their agency, to claim their right to their role in the shaping of their own history and their own God-given destiny. Furthermore, Thomas insisted, and those who come to know me will know why I like this, people of faith should be involved in those revolutions, he argued, because despite all the chaos and contradictions, the revolution is not just about a new political order and a social order. It is about justice and dignity. It is in truth about a new humanity, and that, Thomas says, is what God wants, a new African, a new Asian, away from the distorted, dehumanized, colonized creatures that we have been forced into. Unnamed and renamed, labeled and branded, racialized and depersonalized. I took that with me as I later read Iranian scholar Hamad Dabashi on revolution, who argues that we should consider the concept of revolution in a new way. So looking at what has been called the Arab Spring, Dabashi argues that revolution should no longer be defined solely by the presence or degree of violence, as in the Haitian or French or Russian or Cuban revolutions, but by the depth of permanent and fundamental change. Instead of one cataclysmic event, there will be a series of historic moments, perhaps over years, perhaps over decades sometimes, revealing a grassroots-based, people-driven, enduring search towards fundamental change of society. Now, through this lens, I therefore see a continuity of revolutionary resistance over the long decades of anti-colonial freedom struggles, with figures like Out Shimau of the Cape Khoi from the early days of the European invasion of our country, Donna Kimpavita of the Congo in the 1700s, and that rebirthing itself in the revolutionary masses of the 1950s, the 60s, the 70s, and the 80s, responding to the calls of the Nkrumahs, the Letulis, the Sobukwes, the Lumumbas, the Sankaras, the Mandelas, the Sisulus, the Bikos, and now in this era, somebody like Ibrahim Traore. Macmillan made that speech on February 3rd, 1960 in Cape Town. Before that, however, on January 10, he had premiered the speech in Accra, in Ghana, where Kwame Nkrumah, the longtime freedom fighter and intellectual giant, was the first prime minister of the newly independent state. In Ghana, reports tell us, the speech was received with mostly stony silence, clearly not making the impression Harold Macmillan had hoped for. In Ghana, they already knew the difference between Macmillan's hopes for the colonies and the Africans' fight for liberation. In Cape Town, however, Prime Minister Hendrik Verwoerd was stunned for a moment. Then he rose up in a spontaneous, spirited defense of white supremacy and new colonialism and apartheid, which he called on that day, quote, justice for the white man in South Africa, unquote. Macmillan's and the colonizing world's primary concern was for the well-being of the British Commonwealth and its role in the shifting sands of global affairs, which South Africa will leave when it became a republic a year later. Britain knew, however, not to be too worried about this. English-speaking white South Africa, at first shocked at the idea of being severed from Mother England, and all it meant for them, quickly overcame that emotional moment. Political, diplomatic, sports, and cultural ties, as well as trade and commerce with Britain, remained very strong and even grew as the strategic position of white South Africa in a black Africa within the duopoly world continued to serve Western hegemonic interests. South Africa's politics was sometimes described by these people in Europe as odious, but it was politics that favored white people, and it favored imperialist Jew politics, so the stench that they complained about did not drive anyone out of the room. Thus, despite the initial wringing of hands, the gnashing of teeth, and the clutching of pearls, they understood that nothing fundamentally would change. White solidarity, white political control, white economic interest, and the overall solidified presence of white supremacist ideological and military power that was so necessary to keep blacks in check and under control soon made all of the disagreements between English-speaking South Africans and Afrikaners seem absolutely superficial. White people had reason to believe that those winds of change, while not exactly at their backs, could be controlled, calmed down, and usefully redirected. Black people, however, soon found out what Verwoerd's justice for the white man would mean. The ongoing treason trial was quickly overshadowed by the Sharpeville massacre, followed by a decade of vicious suppression, the banning of the liberation movements, the reality of enforced exile, the Rivonia trial, the life sentences on Robben Island, and ever-intensifying draconian rule at home. Verwoerd's fight now was justice for the white man, no longer justice for the Afrikaner, or Afrikaner culture, or Afrikaner survival. That ominous, deliberately inclusionary term would mean continued whiteness, continued colonization, continued dehumanization, continued apartheid, continued exploitation, continued denial of rights of any kind for black people in our country. And for us, it meant continued struggle. Hendrik Verwoerd did not understand it that day. But Macmillan was not really demanding the abandonment of whiteness. He was really suggesting some palatable political flexibility, some trimming of the sails to the winds of change, a slight tilt of the prow into the coming waves, just enough to let Africans have a finger on the wheel, but with the helm firmly in white hands. P.W. Botha did not grasp it so well either. F.W. de Klerk did a bit better, but Helen Zille and Johan Rupert today understand it best of all. But underneath the surface, denied, suppressed, and feared as they were, those winds of unbroken revolutionary fervor continue to stir, becoming the headwinds of resistance, the whirlwinds of rising consciousness, the storm that by 1976 would hit and overturn South African history, its reality, and the direction of its future. When Harold Macmillan spoke in Ghana, he knew how the wind blew, for right in front of him sat Kwame Nkrumah, one of the most formidable African leaders of his time. In 1958, just 1 year after Ghana's independence, Nkrumah had called African leaders together to flesh out his vision for a united, truly independent Africa. Macmillan knew Nkrumah's mind was set on real freedom, not the freedom that the colonialists had in mind. Nkrumah spoke of colonialism, new colonialism, and genuine freedom. The essence of new colonialism, Nkrumah told that generation as he is telling ours today, is that the state which is subject to it is in theory independent and has all the outward trappings of international sovereignty. In reality, though, its economic system and thus its political policy is directed from the outside. However, Nkrumah also saw very early that the new colonialist grip on Africa was broad and comprehensive, as we are increasingly discovering today. Their methods, he warned, are subtle and varied. They operate not only in the economic field, but also in the political, religious, ideological, and cultural spheres. The political maneuverings of the rich North should be understood in a wider context, Nkrumah knew, and dissected through the lens of the global South in order to truly understand the impact of these actions on Africa and countries of the global South. He understood what US President Eisenhower was talking about when in his famous last address to the American people, he warned America against the danger of the military-industrial complex. Nkrumah, though, had already understood what we today call the deep state. Lurking behind all of this, Nkrumah said, are, quote, the extended tentacles of the Wall Street octopus and its suction cups and muscular strength are provided by a phenomenon dubbed the invisible government, arising from Wall Street's connections with the Pentagon and various intelligence services. So what we are talking about today, Nkrumah already knew. Looking at and understanding the devastating history of US interventions, coup d'etats, regime change wars across the global South, from the assassination of democratically elected leaders who refused to do the bidding of the US, to the endless wars for endless profits and the hegemony we are witnessing still today, killing global South citizens by the millions, knowing that one would be utterly foolish, blind, or willful not to see the truth of the statement. Look at what is happening today from Sudan to North Africa, to Iran, to Lebanon, to the whole Middle East, and we will understand what we are talking about as we sit here today. Before already, but especially after September 11, 2001, it is perhaps more appropriate to speak of the military, industrial, financial, media, intellectual, congressional complex. None of it happened without a carefully calculated and coordinated plan executed by the powerful network of organizations, agencies, and institutions Nkrumah pointed us to, and which make the American empire, with the United Kingdom and Western Europe hiding under its skirts, commit such deadly crimes against humanity, not to mention its war crimes, on such a regular basis, with such impunity, and with such grandiose shamelessness. Consequently, the United States and the UK collaborated to stir such dissent amongst Ghanaians in that time that it led to no less than 6 coup attempts against Nkrumah, and finally his overthrow in 1966. We know that from a now declassified memo from the State Department to President Lyndon Johnson in 1964. Nkrumah is leading Ghana towards what he calls African socialism, but which is in fact a personal dictatorship, wrote Averell Harriman, already manufacturing the justification that the US would need for its intervention in Ghana. However, Harriman assures the president, quote, there are still forces at work within the country which may stem that trend. He was talking about those Africans they had already bought in Ghana, around Ghana's president and the prime minister, and in his inner circle. There is a similar document from the United Kingdom in 1966, discussing how Nkrumah could, quote, be overthrown and be replaced by a more Western-oriented government, end quote. Nkrumah's replacement for the British was to be a certain General Arthur Ankra, regarded by the British, according to the document, quote, as a nice but stupid man, end quote. Exactly the kind of man the empire needs. I do not have time to talk about Patrice Lumumba, who gave the same message at that conference, or about Amilcar Cabral. All of them exposing the breezes of deception, setting the continent alight with their intellect, their fire, and their passion for liberation, signifying the headwinds of resistance and freedom, and setting the sterling examples of genuine leadership for the Sankaras of the future. But they all had to pay the ultimate price. Now, among the many issues surrounding President Cyril Ramaphosa and the ANC under his leadership, one of the most disturbing for me is his and the organization's captivity to white monopoly capital here in South Africa and in the West, and the ways in which he has led South Africa further along the destructive path of neoliberal capitalism, as if more plausible alternatives did not exist. That South Africa today is the country with the greatest socio-economic inequalities in the world, is the result of an economic trajectory chosen by the ANC government since 1994, although much to the satisfaction of world bodies like the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, but much to the misery of the vast majority of our people. Critical analysts, such as Patrick Bond and some Peter Blanche, have seen this from the start, and they have been ringing the alarm bells ever since. Economist Eugene Cancross offers a scathing but entirely on-point critique of what he calls the triumph of capital in South Africa's post-apartheid economy. He mentions how tax concessions by the new government, especially to the gold mining industry, have been preserved, and how the privatization and commercialization of state assets like the fuel producer Sasol, for a song, he says, has benefited as a private company, with the post-apartheid state foregoing all of these profits. Under Mr. Ramaphosa, with South African Airways and parts of Transnet basically already gone, and with Eskom and the rest of Transnet, including our ports on the chopping block, The list is growing alarmingly. Cancross gives a perfect, if dispiriting, description of this new colonialist process. He explains how ownership and control of lands, mines, and major industry remain concentrated, quote, in the hands of a handful of capitalists, exactly as it was in the past. And not only that, ownership of major economic activities has been, quote, systematically transferred to foreign capital, either directly or through the stock exchange, end quote. He goes on to say, it seems that nothing was left to chance. Under the ANC government, exchange control became another tool of enrichment of the few, albeit that the few now included the few blacks from the new elite and the political aristocracy. I quote Cancross some more. During the period of 1998 to 2002, the 6 largest corporations, Anglo-American, Glencore, BHP Billiton, mining conglomerates, Old Mutual, South African breweries, and Liberty, moved tens of billions of rands offshore and listed as foreign companies. 2 major consequences of these actions are, one, the initial movement of the vast amounts of capital offshore out of the control of present or future South African governments. And secondly, the future profits made in South Africa would be exported to the now externally listed and domiciled companies. South Africa's current balance payment deficit is to a significant extent attributable to the continued export of profits and dividends to these and other now foreign companies. So when Helen Zille complains of the tax base in South Africa, and she does not mention this, she's not completely honest about this issue. One should perhaps highlight also just 3 further issues related to this state of affairs. First, those exported profits, though created here in South Africa from the minerals taken from our soil, should have benefited the development of the people of South Africa, who instead now have to carry the loss of these benefits through the taxes they have to pay. Second, one need not look too far for the relationship between the continued impoverishment of South Africa's black majority and the sudden spectacular enrichments of the few under the guise of what they call black economic empowerment, yet another breeze of deception. Third, consider some of the personalities involved, their role then and their positions, and the immense wealth now through the political positions and the choices they made then and they are making now. All of this at great cost and expense to the masses, but this is what Professor J. Scherwel once called, quote, South Africa's rapid deracialization of capital. The rest of the African continent does not fare much better. And as in the case of the so-called independent Francophone countries, the former French colonies, it continues even worse. The successful negotiation gambit offered by France in the early 1960s is outrageously scandalous. Africa was never meant to be independent or successful or in control. And here is an analysis by socio-economic analyst Ziggy Jabbar, who describes the utterly fraudulent independence France negotiated with all of its former colonies in Africa. Under the overall title, the Colonial Pact, it is a system designed for the complete benefit of France and its economic and political interests. And is called fittingly perhaps, although stunningly cynically, quote, a system of compulsory solidarity. The word compulsory preceding solidarity and encompassing wholesale premeditated fraud already blows one's mind, but is perhaps entirely fitting for what France has designed and those African countries have conceded to. This system of compulsory solidarity obliges former French colonies to put 65% of their currency reserves into the French treasury, plus another 20% that should cover financial liabilities. This means that these African countries have access to only 15% of their own money. Furthermore, France has first right of refusal for all government contracts, even if better deals could be found elsewhere. On top of that, France has also first right of refusal to all and any natural resources newly discovered in those African lands. So in its attempt to appear subtle, France could not have been more blatant. Today, however, these countries are in the news, and for entirely different reasons. They are the 21st century signs of the headwinds of resistance and freedom sweeping from west to east and from north to south. The Democratic Republic of the Congo has discovered how its rich mineral wealth, instead of being a blessing for its people, have become a curse. Since the hidden Holocaust of King Leopold in the 19th century, taking the lives of perhaps 15 million Congolese, a Holocaust that we never hear anything about. Millions more are dying in a manufactured instability they call a civil war, while the country is being looted by corporations from Europe, the United States, Israel, and South Africa. And as always, the illustrious names that make us proud have to be mentioned almost in the same breath as the names of those that make us angry, from General Ankara in 1965 to Cyril Ramaphosa in 2025. The cultivation of house Negroism has always been an indispensable weapon in the arsenal of imperialism, and we need to understand that. However, the headwinds of resistance are rising, and they are blowing from the northwest of Africa. The new alliance of Sahel states, Niger, Mali, Burkina Faso, is a confederation ushering in a new kind of politics. Young Captain Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso, like a Sankara Didivus, alongside Presidents Assimi Goïta and Abdurrahman Chiari, are not only telling the Pharaoh to let their people go, they are telling the Pharaoh to get out, literally. And so before our very eyes, the Sahel nations, together now with Namibia and Botswana, and promising signs even in Ghana and Senegal, are creating a new Africa. They are reclaiming the mineral wealth of their people. They are canceling or renegotiating contracts with foreign companies. And learning from South Africa's fraudulent BEE practices, they are pursuing genuine economic empowerment for their people. They are creating real jobs and real educational opportunities on measurable scales for their youth. They are closing foreign military bases. They are rearranging diplomatic relations, genuinely fighting corruption, forging alternative regional alliances that serve the aspirations of the region and of their people, and they are resurrecting in the process our dignity and our pride in being African. They are the embodiment of a new Africa rising, and the youth from Nairobi and Abuja to Kampala, and from Abidjan and Kinshasa to Cape Town are responding to this call. They have become the personification of the headwinds of resistance and freedom I am talking about. This is the leadership and the politics Africa desperately needs. Walter Sisulu would have been so proud. But these developments are shining a light on South Africa. The end result of the May 29 elections, is the coalition between the ANC and the DA, as we all know, with a very few small parties like a street with only half the lights on, which they insist on calling a government of national unity. Those breezes of deception, disguised as winds of change, are once again blowing. The DA is not merely claiming ownership, it is firmly establishing BASCAP. AfriForum and Solidarity understand that perfectly, and so does Donald Trump, who recognizes South Africa as fertile soil for the toxic seeds of a rejuvenated white supremacy. We have to be extremely vigilant here. One reason, besides the will of our oligarchs, why the GNU still exists, is that there has been so little substantial difference between the ANC and the DA, briefly almost interrupted by the Zuma era, but finally eroded under Mr. Ramaphosa. The argument that the GNU will collapse because the ANC and the DA are too far apart does not hold in my view. 30 years of pretense has just played itself out. Our economic policies alone make the point. Our foreign policies are not far behind. The Zionist sub-imperialists with Western new colonialist support and direction, just as the DA requested and planned, are determined to keep control. When the collapse comes, it will be for other reasons. What a year ago I raised as a serious question, namely, whether under this GNU policies intended to embody justice, security, and dignity for the vast majority of South Africa's people will survive, while policies that buttress neoliberal capitalism and all its deleterious effects will further entrench, is now, with the Ramaphosa-Musk Starlink hideousness, a grim reality. And it is not at all about unity. It is about what remains in whose hands, from our land to our minerals, to our oceans and what is in and under them, from the Reserve Bank and the mines and the ownership of production to the minds of our children. For a few years now, I have been speaking about and writing about the politics of vulgarity as a global phenomenon. I suppose that is still an apt description of what our politics is subjecting us to. But political scientist and public commentator, activist Vijay Prashad is offering us a more appropriate concept, which I think helps us greatly understand our unfolding political dynamics globally and here at home. Dr. Prashad speaks of what he calls the politics of decadence. Political decadence, Prashad says, is the politics of a ruling class caught in the habit of rule. It cannot perceive of itself as not holding power. When that happens, it seeks reasons for its loss of power in everything external, unable to do self-reflection, self-critique, self-correction, let alone renewal, even if the state of its decay is absolutely, wholly, vividly displayed in every decision they take. The politics of decadence has no vision for itself, or for the country, or for the world. It has no compelling narrative that can capture the imagination, stir the energy of the people, or inspire confidence in itself among the people, because it has no imagination or creativity left. It serves no purpose except self-preservation through corruption and blind pursuit of the status quo. It has no goals but for itself. So caught up in the downward spirals of self-absorption, it always reacts violently to those who want to assert their right to inclusion and justice, dignity and equity. Hence the marginalization, the aggression, and even destruction of those who dissent and refuse to bow to their will and their power. I believe that this is correctly and precisely describing the situation in the post-democratic Western world. All the pretense about democracy and the so-called rule of law is gone. All their inherent fascism is exposed in their complicity with Israel's genocide and in their response to their people's solidarity with Palestine. Prashad's definition is also precisely describing South Africa's DA-ANC coalition. Now, I called the GNU a monstrosity not just because of the unwieldy, ideologically wholly incompatible and horrifically costly cabinet. The deliberately manufactured unsustainability and incapacitating in some portfolios like land reform and agriculture, home affairs, are mere examples. This GNU, in my view, is a viper's nest of political contradictions held together by an unhealthy sense of entitlement an unholy disdain for morality, an insatiable hunger for power, driven by expediency and self-serving interests. The unbelievable display of arrogance and disdain by the Minister for Higher Education just the other day in the committee session simply proves the point. Despite our self-glorification about the ICJ and in defiance of the obligations that come with those rulings, South Africa's diplomatic and especially economic ties with that unrepented genocidal state are still unbroken, with companies connected to the president prominent in their shameless fueling of and profiteering from the genocide. Because the Zionists, from Helen Zille to Gayton McKenzie, are firmly in charge. The president's complicity, Dirko's silence, and Minister Paktau's lame excuses are so many stains on Mandela's memory, even though they invoke that memory at every shameful turn. But that is the politics of decadence. Just how much damage will they do to our people before they are done? But there's another question I raised a year ago, but now perhaps the crucial and only question that matters with this GNU. And it is this: are we the first people who, having fought a struggle for liberation and won, are now turning around begging our oppressors to rescue us from the failures of our own making, the betrayal of our own people, and the misrule of leaders of our own choosing? There truly is no substitute for dignity and self-respect. We are the country, my brothers and sisters, we create. In the last 30 years, we have created a country where corruption is not only rife, it thrives, it is encouraged, it is fiercely protected, from the president's office on that hill to the small SASSA office in the township, from Judge Zondo's forgotten list to the fake academic certificates of people in high places and high salaries, to a justice system choking to death in the dust gathering on those unopened files because the names on those files are the names of people who are too powerful to touch. We have created a blatant new liberal capitalist state where social cohesion, like Noah's dove, cannot find a foothold because not only have we not eradicated apartheid, we have sat back and watched it metastasize, while a few enormously rich and scandalously ostentatious benefited from it. We knowingly and deliberately and against the Constitution reinstated apartheid by re-racializing our society and racially recategorizing our people. We reinforced it for the sake of rich rewards for the few, deaf to the cries of the excluded. We have created a country where we have allowed racism to flourish and be normalized by disguising it with deceitful terms such as meritocracy and fit for purpose, which the DA constantly uses, discarding historical and political context, even while scandalizing the true purposes of black economic empowerment and historical redress, and trampling upon the ideals of a genuine economic inclusion in our country. Our willful silence makes room for the authoritarian tendencies revealed in a new law proposed by the ANC, in terms of security laws, giving quietly but giving government the right to spy on religious institutions, on civil society organizations, on any person who raises a voice of dissent. So heaven help us once Starlink is in place. The imperialist divisionism in the DA's Western Cape Power Bill, with its insane demands for what will essentially become white control over vast tracts of our land and our lives. And what shall we say about the return of one of the most despicable characteristics of apartheid, namely detention without trial, such as meted out by the highest court of the land to Mr. Zuma not so very long ago. We have a president whose visit to the United States was not the representation of a proud free country, but rather a shameful display of submissive sub-imperialism. Trump's insistence on the presence of a white oligarch whose undeserved generational wealth was built on the undeserved generational impoverishment of black people, as well as the politically irrelevant presence of two enormously rich white golfers who have made no discernible contribution to the struggle for freedom and equality, nor to a reconciliation process built on repentance, remorse, repair, and reparation that could have resulted in justice, restoration, and healing in our nation, made it absolutely clear that this was not a state visit of two counterparts, let alone of two equals. This, not the transparent, childish, and malignant lies about white persecution and white genocide on the screen, and Afrikaner refugee anguish in Texas and Nebraska was the intended result, in insult to our people, the deliberate design of disrespect, the public proof of our recolonization. The fake agenda was on the screen. On the real agenda was not the representation and the protection of our sovereignty, our dignity, our self-respect, or the nobility of our struggle, but a backdoor deal with a new fascist, new Nazi oligarch for whose appeasement and the enrichment of the usual few we are willing to change our laws, undermine our constitution, and sell our soul. Walter Sisulu's words are ringing in my ears. The people are our strength, he said. In their service, we shall face and conquer those who have lived off the backs of our people. For those in the Oval Office on that day still eating off the backs of our people, it is as if these words were never spoken. But we take Walter Sisulu seriously. We shall face and we shall conquer them. We are the country we create. There is a new world, a new Africa rising, and South Africa, a country with such rich history, such a courageous and gifted people, such enormous potential, but with politics without substance, leadership without vision, laws without the remedies of justice, a constitution without constitutional authenticity and authority, is not nearly in a position to navigate these new winds of change. But we are the country we create. And if that is so, it is also within our power to reclaim and to recreate. So, can we undo the damage? Can we stop the rot of the politics of the stomach and recreate the politics of decency, honesty, integrity, courage, and virtue we once thrived on? Can we regain the love and trust of our people? Can we reclaim the pride and dignity with which we waged our struggle and won? Can we rediscover the resilience that made us fight and defeat the mightiest regime on this continent? Can we beg forgiveness from God and from our people and pray for the redemption of our soul? Can we reclaim our revolution so that South Africa can be truly reborn? A new Africa is already on the way. Do we have the courage to join her? I, for one, my brothers and sisters, believe that this is possible, that we can. Not just for the sake of the memory of Walter and Albertina Sisulu, but for ourselves and for our children. So let us begin today. I thank you.
That's Dr. Alan Busak for you. Ntate Muruti, thank you very much for your remarks and, of course, the broad sweep of history that you gave us, a history lesson that you gave us, and making us connect the dots and also interpret our situation in a historical and global context. Now, I said earlier about Tate Padile Hotla, that is one of the leading individuals in our society who've come out openly, publicly to comment on so many facts, issues, stats that face us as a people.
But there's a story I can tell about that he doesn't know, I know. I also want to acknowledge Imtiaz Suleiman, a product of our university. I think we all come from that famous university in the kingdom called UKZN. Ladies and gentlemen, I have a very brief sort of like a mandate. But firstly, let me acknowledge the Sisulu Foundation for Social Justice, its patron, Dr. Lindiwe Sisulu, its chairperson, Professor Dr. Reverend Alan Busak, its chief executive officer, Mpumzi Degasi, in collaboration with the Vaal University of Technology and its leadership under Professor Kehlan Dove. When I met him this afternoon, I remember that his predecessor was nicknamed Jesus of the Vaal. So I feel blessed to be here. It's a holy place, but obviously he is doing something different from what Jesus did. I want to thank the university and the foundation for this inaugural lecture, for one of the iconic leaders and champion of our struggle and freedom, Dr. Walter Max Sisulu. It is indeed a personal great honor to be invited to participate and respond to some of Reverend Alan Busak's delivery. I'm sure you'll never have such a historical analysis with depth of what Alan had to share with us. I have listened to Dr. Lihotla Padi. I've listened to the Reverend, and there are a few lessons that I've picked up. I must say that when I came here and I was asked to come and respond, I chose not to have the speech of Dr. Alan Busak. I said to myself, I'm a doctor. When a patient comes to you, they don't often warn you. They just come and present a problem, and you must then decide to deal with that. But also, I think it gives me an opportunity not to wander around, but choose a few messages that I think we can all crystallize and talk about. There are 5 of these messages that I'll just list for the sake of clarity. I think we had a message of hope about what Baba Sisulu stood for, hope. We heard about the winds of change. Whether you call it the wind or the winds depend on whether you have read the original speech of Harold Macmillan. I think the initial title was Wind, but after that, winds began to blow in Africa, and this is what I think Alan was capturing. So there was winds of change that took place. And of course, he articulated the issue of Africa rising, especially in the Sahel region, providing a clarity of leadership, maybe the same clarity that I think Kwame Nkrumah had, I think initially when Africa began to experience democracy. And he mentioned the current democracy in South Africa, which I think often people have described as a miracle democracy. And we've never tried to decode this, and I want to share you my understanding. The miracle democracy of South Africa is a democracy in which the majority are always backing the minority. You don't have to laugh. We're always begging the minority to experience freedom and to govern ourselves. Basically, what it says is that we have a truncated freedom, and we don't seem to realize that. But I also just want to quote someone who's no longer with us, the late Winnie Madikizela Mandela, often said we are in government, but we are not in power. And she always repeated that every time, that there is something strange about this democracy, that we are in government, but not in power. So with those few words, I will just expand to embellish maybe what Dr. Alan Busak said. But I want to state what I call the obvious about Baba Sisulu. Tata Sisulu was known for his humility throughout his life and his fatherly demeanor as a person. While Mandela was revered as a leader, Sisulu was loved as a father. I'm not saying that Tata was not loved, as you all know him, but there was something that was touching about Sisulu that was different from Nelson Mandela. He was obviously a great strategist who believed in doing work quietly, determinedly, and with, I think, relentlessness. He was a unifier, a person of great foresight in our time. Lest we forget, President Mandela was identified by Walter Sisulu and recruited by Walter Sisulu to be a member of the ANC. As they say, the rest is history. You know what Mandela, and a strategist does that. He identifies people, nurtures them, and he remained Mandela's counselor and mentor throughout his career as this great icon that the world saw. What we didn't realize was, unlike in many situations when there's a successful man, there's a woman behind, in this case, there was a strategist behind. Now, let me just share you a small personal story. I have a fear for heights. And on the 2 occasions in my life where I boarded a helicopter in my life, I was always going to Venda, and I asked myself why. Firstly, I went there with the late Education Minister, Professor Bengu, when we visited a high school called Mbilwi to understand the secret of their success at the matric results. That was quite early on. And the second time was with Baba Walter Sisulu, going to a graduation at the University of Venda. And I'm sure any of you who have been to Venda for a graduation will know that it lasts the whole day, because every graduate on the stage gets praise singing, dancing, and all sorts of stories are told before they actually go through the process. So we spent the whole day there and came back in this helicopter. So Walter Sisulu was a founding member of the ANC Youth League, the structure that changed the shape of the ANC and its Africanist approach with Anton Limbede, Nelson Mandela, Oliver Tambo. And it was this ANC Youth League actually that shaped the future direction of the struggle by bringing militancy and championing an Africanist approach, almost similar to what Nkrumah was championing. He was a central figure in the Defiance Campaign of 1952, and obviously he was accused number 2 after Mandela in the Rivonia treason trial, because he was Mandela's mentor. He was very close, and they thought that if they could nail the 2 of them, the treason trial will be done. Let me again go back to the speech that Alan has given. I'm sure I would suggest that all of you get a copy of it, and it must be maybe put on the website. But let me take the three areas that I want to talk about. I'm sorry, the points that I picked up. Obviously, Padili Khotla spoke about hope, which was one of Walter Sisulu's strengths. He always preached hope. And there can be no doubt that he lived for hope, and I think wherever he is now, he must be hoping for the country to become better. Because at the moment, I think we are in a corner that I can't describe. I think Alan spoke about the winds of change. When Harold Macmillan delivered, I think, his wind of change speech on the 3rd of February in Parliament, this sent a clear message on decolonization and a distaste for the apartheid system by the British government. That is what it appeared to be. But any of you who have known British people, you know how subtle and how two-faced they are. They can say one thing and mean another thing. British people would never say, something is rubbish or you are stupid. They will simply say, it's not wise to do that thing. Meaning that you who are doing that, you are stupid. But they won't say that. So the British Empire at the time when Harold Macmillan came was no longer sustainable economically. It was becoming expensive to the motherland. Of course, there was another fear that the Soviet Union, or the Soviet Empire as it was called, was beginning to infiltrate into Africa. And the US government was fearful that when African countries become under this British Empire, they will be taken away by the Soviet Union and be under the influence of the Soviet Union. So they pressurized Britain to give some of these countries independent so that they can feel that they've got a new sweet, to chew and enjoy, rather than be under the rule of the British. But it was the fear of the American government of the Soviet Union that led to a lot of African countries getting independent. So the speech of Harold Macmillan of the winds accelerated and continued to blow in the African continent, as I think Alan has articulated. The liberation movements in our country were obviously banned at that time. The struggle went underground, it went into exile, it became international. Something else happened. In 1966, on the 6th of September, Hendrik Verwoerd was offended by Demetrius Offenders. Later on, the Black consciousness movement emerged and galvanized the youth and began to encourage the youth. The Soweto uprising took place, I think, on the 16th of June 1976. Steve Biko was murdered in the police detention on the 12th of September 1977. The Release Mandela concert took place on the 11th of June in London, 1988. Nelson Mandela was released on the 11th of February 1990. CODESA was established and we voted for the first time in April 27, 1994. We then had 30 years of ANC majority rule, and now following the 2024 elections, we have something called the GNU, or Government of National Unity. Those of you who know what the GNU is in another term, is called a Wildebeest. We are now planning a national dialogue on the 15th of August 2025, a luta continua. How many dialogues, Bosperats, Makotlas, commissions, task teams do we need to address or confront the obvious challenges that we face of inequality, poverty, and unemployment in South Africa? As I say, we've had 30 years of ANC rule, and this is what we have landed up with. The winds of change, of course, continue to blow in different shapes and forms, and hopefully, as Padili Khotla said, in the direction to the South Africa we have all hoped, dreamt, and aspired for. We are still looking for it. We can't find it. We are still in search of this new South Africa, but it has been new since 1994. As you know, Walter Sisulu was instrumental in the Defiance campaign, the Freedom Charter, which, as Alan pointed out, he watched from the rooftops because he was banned at the time, he and Mandela. They couldn't be there in Cape Town. They had to sit on rooftops. He was part of the planning the Women's March in 1956. Of course, Albertina, his wife was there, the mother of Lindiwe. And then these were all followed by the Sharpeville massacre. All of these are winds that were blowing with hope that we are going to arrive in heaven, but I suspect we are more closer to hell than heaven at the moment. So the second point I want to make that I picked up from Alan is the Sisulu legacy he spoke about extensively. This can be summarized in a few ways. Walter Sisulu played many roles in shaping our struggle, fighting for peace, fighting for unity, and fighting for social justice. He occupied many positions within the movement, the African National Congress. From the formation of the ANC Youth League, the establishment of Mkondo Sizwe, to becoming the Secretary General between 1949 and 1955, and later on becoming the Deputy President of the ANC in 1990 to 1994 in order to stop the fight between Thabo Mbeki and Cyril Ramaphosa and Chris Hani. During the time of Walter Sisulu, the ANC was a unified broad church, a movement of hope for the people. It even acquired the title that it was the leader of the people. I think one cannot say the same about today's ANC. A factionalized broad church, unable to renew itself, to adapt, but fossilizing every day as time marches on. I mean, it keeps on singing this so-called renewal song, but we don't see any renewal within the movement. All we see is more divisions. In my mother tongue, there is an expression that I want to quote because I suppose we have got several official languages. My mother tongue is Pedi. We say, "Tau tša go hloka seboka, di šiwa ke nare e hlotša." Those that understand Pedi, it means that people who are not united can be defeated by very simple things. That's basically the translation. I think one of the greatest legacy that I think people underestimate is for Baba Sisulu to have identified and recruited Mandela into the ANC. That for me is something we don't often realize and recognize because I think Mandela obviously became larger than life and larger than what appears to be. But this to me is the greatest thing a strategist does, is to identify people around him that can build something better than I think that he could do on his own. So if there is a legacy that this icon left us, was identifying this man called Mandela. But more importantly, perhaps, together with Albertina, the Sisulus left us, I must say, the late Zwelakhe, Max Sisulu, Lindiwe, Eleanor, and Sheila, who all have continued to contribute and shape South Africa's evolving democracy in their own way. There's no better way to leave a legacy than to leave it in your children. In fact, that's why I respect the fact that the university invited students to be here, because the legacy of what we discuss here today will be carried out by them, not by us. We are now becoming people of the past, they are now the future. And I think we should remember that. And Walter Sisulu left us his children who have carried on the baton to shape what we are undergoing. Of course, sometimes the circumstances under which they are operating are difficult, but nevertheless, they, like their dad, they've been relentless and resistant, and they carry on. The next point I wanted to touch upon is this of Africa rising. It is indeed true that Africa is rising, particularly in the Sahel region, where President Traore is obviously leading us. He is obviously the new Kwame Nkrumah. But just in general, factually, what's happening in the continent of Africa? Africa is a rapidly growing continent. It's rapidly growing economically, demographically, and culturally. If you look at fashion today, people look into Africa for fashion. If you look at sports today, you look at all the soccer players that you see on television, they are all of African origin. If you look at fashion today, you look at innovation today, it comes from Africa. So as a continent, despite all the problems we experience here in South Africa, there is something to hope that our continent is rising to eclipse the other continents and become a major force into the future. We may not be there to experience that, but we must obviously support and promote that and be part of laying the foundation for the future of our children. Africa has a demographic boom or a dividend where a significant percentage of its population is under the age of 30. There's no continent like that. You go to Europe, most people are above 70, most of them are demented, most of them are in old age homes. We don't have that yet in Africa. I'm not saying it won't come, but we must take advantage of the fact that we have got a youthful group of people who are innovative and full of energy to drive, I think, the future for us. We have a continent that is rich in resources of wealth, in renewable energy, which is the new thing of the future. We are undergoing rapid urbanization, and we have got a burgeoning economic growth. As a continent, we have the potential to be the empire of the future. By every account and by every studies that I have looked at, Africa is seen as the continent of the future, and at the moment, that future is being led in the Sahel region, and I think we should support that. Of course, I seem to remember that in 1997, former President Thabo Mbeki, having noticed this, organized a meeting at the Ndaba Hotel where the conference was titled the Africa Renaissance, and it was an important vision that he had at the time, but as you know, his vision was cut short by, I think, the factionalism of the ruling party. Somebody called Frantz Fanon once said, each generation must, out of relative obscurity, discover its mission, fulfill it, or betray it. That's what Frantz Fanon said. The generation of Walter Sisulu identified their mission. It was freedom in our lifetime. One can safely say, and without fear of contradiction, that this generation identified its mission clearly and fulfilled it. They have now left us, but they left us a foundation upon which we must build. They never betrayed their mission and pursued this relentlessly, despite all the obstacles that they came across. They went into prison, they stayed in Robben Island, they were harassed. Their children sometimes never saw their parents for certain times, but nevertheless, they had the clarity of what needed to be done, and they pursued that, and they still left normal children, One of them is here. So they came into a troubled world, a complex world, and a difficult world of racism, of inequality, and laid a blueprint for non-racial and an equal society in South Africa, and prepared the African continent to be a continent of the future. Thus, they left the world a better place through their struggles than the place they found and they came into. If there is something that we should all strive for as human beings, it's when you are given a responsibility of anything, try and live what you inherit better than when you inherited it. That is the greatest measure of achievement that you can do. I think Imtiaz Solomon can attest to that. In 2012 in South Africa, this generation of ours, we thought we had identified a mission. We came up with something called the National Development Plan. It was popularized, it went to Parliament, all the parties, the ruling party at the time, all accepted it, and it was revered as the lodestar, the blueprint, the vision of the country. 13 years after 2012, very little has been done. Very little. I was fortunate as the deputy chair of that planning commission to review what has actually happened and what were the reasons behind what did not happen. What we found was that the major reason why the plan was never implemented was that the state had no capacity. I'm not saying something you all don't know. You have seen it all the time. That's why we're going down the drain. We have no capacity in implementing anything. What we have the capacity for is boss parades, hugging each other, eating everywhere we go, and just talking and not doing things. That is the story of South Africa. I mean, we can fly from here to go to the United States to go and tell them that we are a country riddled with crime. I mean, we have to see it on CNN, while some of us experience it all the time. So as a generation, I think we have to accept that despite identifying our mission, we have failed to, I think, to discharge our historic mission, because our state, that was elected by us. Let's not kid ourselves. We got the government that we wanted, we got the leadership that we wanted. Even when it messes us up, we find reason to excuse them. We are not hard enough on each other. So, ladies and gentlemen, that's the country in which we live. But let's make no mistake, it's our country. We, as Alan has said, let's have hope. Let's work hard to try and reclaim that which we have lost. Let's work hard to make our country better than we have found it, or better than we're seeing it slide down, and make it the country that we all have dreamt of, despite the challenges that we face. Let us take the lessons from the example of Walter Sisulu. Live with integrity, be hopeful, and work for people in order that we can have a better democracy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Malekapuru Makhoba, for your comments, your remarks, leaving us on a note of optimism, of hope. Because at the end of the day, you know, we can all complain, we can all point out to the weaknesses, but at the end of the day, it is up to us who have identified what the problems are to go out there and fix them. As the elders would say, when you are confused about how to proceed in a moment of confusion and darkness, ask yourself, what would the elders say? In this context, I think our question should be, what would Ntate Walter Sisulu, Me Albertina Sisulu say? How so? Right? Because at a very personal level to themselves, they saw no peace for their family when they got involved in the broader picture of trying to advance the aspirations of their people and express the frustrations of the oppressed black majority. Because not only was the father figure taken away to prison, mother left by herself to continue with the same struggles, raise children who along the way got arrested, terrorized in various ways and so on, but somehow still keeping their sanity and the vision alive. So I suppose there's a lot to learn, Mayor Sisulu, from what your family went through and what your parents had to contend with. Because otherwise they could have chosen to sit on the sidelines and complain and just let it be and say, well, whoso or claring. So I suppose this is the point, ultimately, of a lecture such as the one that we are having here today. Ntate Mpumzi Mtekazi is the CEO of the Sisulu Foundation for Social Justice. He's going to make a couple of remarks about the foundation itself as well as the relationship with the Val University of Technology. Mpumzi, thank you.
Thank you, Pratim. Ladies and gentlemen, Your Excellencies, Board of Trustees, and the patron in particular, I am taking a detour because on the program we are meant to recognize the Sahel ambassadors. In this envelope is a slight request from them to say, can't we have this separately? We're going to recognize them with our prestigious award, named after Walter and Albertina Sisulu, prestigious award. Because in them we see representatives of our aspirations authentically. In them, we were going to draw some lessons on how to deal with internal betrayals. Because of their practical response to the 1884-1885 Berlin Conference, which designs maps, brought narratives that we are not part of, compose anthems, national flags that had nothing to do with us. So in them we're going to recognize those aspirations and how they're handling their decolonial project. So we are deferring that. To pick it up, Pratim, from where you left off, you speak about the family that accounts for 59 years in jail without committing any crime. Dr. Walter Sisulu. Now, this is my direct challenge to the young scholars, students, to go and explore that 59 years in prison. He spent 26, his cousin spent 18, his youngest son spent 10. That already gives you 54. I'm not talking about the jail beds like our patron. I'm not yet reflecting on the mother the brothers and so forth. I'm conservative, it could be 60 something. Ironically, nobody is interested in that kind of a story because this is a story that you'll never hear in the world. Even the Kennedys don't have this as part of our rich history. So we've got this history and we choose to omit this part when we narrate our story of our liberation struggle. Fair enough, here we are today. We've decided to collaborate with Value Invest of Technology. Central to our relationship is to deal with issues of socio-economic justice. We fielded across, and strangely, traditional intellectual schools of the left were not keen to come and partner with us. UCT jumped into the opportunity. Hence we had the inaugural lecture of Mama Albertina Sisulu at UCT last year, where we invited all former heads of state. Only one pitched up. And we got a hiding for that, Chairman, as if we omitted others. Now it tells a story about the suppression of this legacy of Walter Sisulu, willingly. Walter has been submerged under many figures that he himself created. It's a historical error that morally obliges all of us to look into this issue. Walter never wanted anything from us. The fact that he was important to Mandela, it means he was important to the country. Now, do we have to be scientists and scholars to see that? We don't have to. But we are being pigeonholed to think in a particular way. So here we are, we're promoting pedagogical development with these universities, including Stellenbosch. Imagine Stellenbosch willingly coming to partner with us. Yeah, before he was arrested in 1960-61, he had a farm here in this area, in Val. That's what brought us here, in tracing his footprints. That if you unpack his life, you want to talk about his entrepreneurial skills, you can't omit this part because he had a pocket of land. DVC, Nelani, as part of your curriculum, I hope will generate curriculum that is going to talk to these issues when we unpack Walter's ethical leadership, Walter's ethical paradigm. This is a surname which was seen as part of collateral damage in the 60s. Interestingly, after democracy, that stigma is still there. That to associate yourself with this family, you're going to be part of a collateral damage, negating their massive contribution to where we are. So, part of our marriage with your VUT is to infuse Walter and Albertina into their curriculum, especially their ethical lenses, and see what comes out of that. Rather than learning about foreign leaders, we rather learn about our own leaders. We've just signed an MOU. Centrally to the MOU is the issue of the research chair. I'm glad that the chair of the Gift of the Givers is here. Chair, Gift of the Givers promised 2 boreholes to this institution because children don't have water here. We haven't got that. from your team. I'm not putting you on the spot, but I just thought that now that we are connecting eyes, let me smuggle this one in. So, as part of this pedagogical development, me and him, and the VC touched on that to say we'll even have competitions for kids to write these essays, not only these essays, but to produce this pedagogical material that is not there on Walter. Your journals, books, research papers, and so forth. Because it's an indictment to have a Walter and then there's no material about him. It's wrong. It's not even an error. It's betrayal. I'm talking briefly at the surface level on what conjoins us with the VUT. I'll be challenging the young scholars to look at Walter's meeting with Chair Mao. He's the only ANC leader who met Chairman Mao. Interestingly, nobody is interested in that conversation. That here are forebearers cultivating what I would argue has become to be called BRICS later in the years. But scholarship will talk to that. So, the lessons that we are living here with is the ability to elast hope. Deputy Chair, you spoke about the elasticity of hope as we have transplanted to Ndate Walter Sisulu. His Xhosa name, by the way, is Maqabe. And we need to spend much time to look at how do we move away as a majority from begging to this minority that is strangling us. And scholarship must respond to that. Not only WhatsApp groups or rallies or post parades, but scholarship must respond. Why would the majority willingly go back and hand over the country to former colonizers? Let me leave it here, Pratim. I can write a book about how did we arrive at establishing this foundation. But there are people who can speak better on that part, such as the following speaker.
Thank you very much, Mpumzi, for your remarks, and we are now coming to the end of the proceedings today. And I'm going to call on the patron of the Sisulu Foundation for Social Justice, very renowned leader in our society and has got an illustrious story to tell herself as a young woman who got arrested and fled the country and studied in Swaziland, went overseas and studied elsewhere, came back and became minister in so many different portfolios. A high-profile person, as I said, in her own right, but person better placed to tell the story of her family. Some of us interacted here and there with the family through Brazwelake Sisulu as an example, as my boss at the SABC. He also once set me up, and he was meant to speak at a conference in the UK on broadcasting, different bosses of broadcasting companies from the Commonwealth countries, as they were called then. One day he calls me up to his office and he says, hey, you know, I'm meant to go to London to do 1, 2, 3. Can you go and do this thing? Hey, boss, no, I just do programs and play music. I don't do stuff. I don't do stuff like that. I don't know how you budget or how you do strategy workshops and so on. And then you expect me to go and tell them about broadcasting because I don't do exactly the same thing. So go and tell them your story, and your story will be our story. So I went there and I did it my way. Hopefully I did not discredit the SABC at the time. I didn't get any negative feedback. Neither did he say well done or whatever. So, Mayor Lindiwe Sisulu, the patron, please come and talk to the people. Thank you very much.
Tim, thank you very much for that introduction, and good afternoon to all of you. I intend to be very short on this matter because much has been said which covers most of what it is we have here about. I want to thank the university for affording us this opportunity to be here, recognized as an entity that has particular aims and objectives, and putting us on a podium to address the students that are here. Thank you very much for that. I got in touch with the university running after a very different agenda. This was the University of Vaal, and I was convinced it was built on my father's land. So I came around and I said, look, I'm looking for my father's land. They said, well, go look around there. When you find it, come back to us. I'm still looking, and I'm certain I'm sitting on it. But in any case, even if he were alive, he would gladly have given it. Thank you so much for providing us the venue to come here and reminisce about some of the things that we want to share with yourselves. Ellen Busek has gone on at length, indicating the intricacies of the space we occupy and our feelings and etc. We got the space today. Thank you very much. Mpumzi, thank you for arranging this. I know it was very difficult for you because most of us are very difficult people to deal with. We have our own objectives, we have our own programs, and having anybody introduce a new program to us is very difficult. Thank you for bringing us to where we are. We are host to a whole lot of very important people. In my language, they're called Your Excellency, who've come to join us here. We're very glad to have you here to share with us some of our views, some of where we come from, and have the kind of lecture that we had from Alan Busak. He ranks for me one of the best speech makers because he has a way of infusing that which comes so naturally to him. And I used to listen to him when I was an activist. And I thought, that's a God-given gift. And I would say that to my mother. And my mother said, you God-given? What do you know about God? Because it's not something that I would entertain on a regular basis. But we have him here. Thank you so much, Reverend, for everything that you have shared with us. Then I have the other extreme, an agnostic, whose religion is figures and nothing else. If they don't add up, nothing adds up. We managed to have him as an addition to our foundation, and he's trying to sharpen our mind around figures and statistics. He's never going to get there because my mind is very round. It doesn't have the sharp edges that he is wanting out of it. But he's the one who's making sure that all the figures add up, and hopefully our budget also adds up, I'm not sure. I want to thank the university here. The university occupies, as Mr. Mdegazi has indicated, a very special place in my heart because it was the first place I could link up with my father. My father was a landowner. He was and he sold land. And by the time he was arrested, all of that was confiscated. So I thought, okay, I'm going to try and trace it. I tried to trace it, and this is where I ended up, in a friendship. No land, no money, just a friendship. But it's an important friendship for me, a very valuable friendship, because this is where I come to when I feel I want to relate to my past, I want to relate to my father, and his land taken, it doesn't matter. I feel a lot of pride when I see something of this nature in this university. Thank you very much for your leadership. And I hope that we can continue in the relationship that we have. I want to say thank you to Professor Magalapure. I met him in London. I was doing my PhD. He had just about finished his. And I found him so pragmatic. All this politics that we go on idealizing, he's very pragmatic. This is how things will happen. And finally, I caught up with him when I came home, and he continues to be an inspiration for me because I don't have that in my mind which is able to cover the scientific side of things. Thank you for coming here and speaking to us. Mpumzi, thank you for arranging this. I'm hoping that we can continue our relationship with the university. Thank you very much for having us. It stirs in me something that I would want to continue. When we were young, this is where my father came to because this is where his business was, and I relate to that so much more now that I'm older than when I was young. When I was young, we were sitting there in the car, and all there was there were the sheep around there. And I thought, but this is very boring. Why should we come here? Now I value that space that I missed out on. And I come here and I feel I can relate to this place. Thank you for having us. Thank you for allowing us to host our seminar today. To all of you esteemed, distinguished people who represent other countries, thank you for blessing our space with your presence. And we hope that when we go to your country, or when you go to your country, you can say, you know, there are some people down there in South Africa, and if you want to empty some of your pennies, you can send them down there. And Tias, you've always been there whenever we wanted to find a way of relating to our communities. He's been there with Puzzle. I know you're looking at your watch. I'm rounding up. He would be there providing us with puzzles for all of those people who would come to us and listen to us, and we would have a kind of very warm arrangement because he was there to provide us with the gifts, because he is the head of Gift of the Givers. Thank you for giving. May you continue giving. To our speakers here, I'm hoping that we can put together some kind of bulletin or something where we can share with the world what it is that we have been able to discuss today, because I found it very riveting. I found it extremely riveting, and thank you so much for the space that we've had. And we will not charge anybody anything for circulating that, because we think that exchange of knowledge, exchange of views is absolutely essential for the kind of community that we have here, of young minds who can engage with the ideas that we have and perhaps prove them right or prove them wrong. We don't know. But I'm glad we had the space to engage with yourselves, and I'm hoping that we can continue this relationship. You might not have given me back my father's land, but you've given me back the joy of being here and seeing our young people engage with us. I could see them nodding, and I could see when Reverend Busak was going up an octave that they were also almost standing up, because he has that kind of charisma in him. Thank you for providing the space, and we hope that we'll continue coming here on a regular basis. Thank you to also the people who came to support us. I see a cousin of mine there, Tami Kaplaki. He thinks of himself as a poet and a writer. I just see him at nightclubs, that's all. And next to him is a prominent man who will make sure that we are forever out of jail. I spent enough of my time in jail. I have a lawyer now who's presented himself, and I've adopted a lawyer. Thank you for coming, Comrade Darling Pofu. Do you want to stand up to say hello to everybody so they see? And for the youngsters here, he is the father of that very vibrant young man who keeps everybody on their toes. So switch on WT, SM, whatever it is. I'm sure you all know it. Switch on to it. That young man is a product of that man. Thank you for giving us a brilliant young person. To all of you, especially our esteemed guest ambassadors who are here, thank you for taking time to be with us. We really appreciate your presence because it adds gravitas to our organization and our celebration of particular space we occupy. And long may you continue supporting us, and we will make sure too that we will support you in whatever way. We will never be there to protect you from any coup in the country, but we will be there to make sure that the world knows we have friends and will be able to share with them the progress that we are making in the African continent. I'm very proud to be African. When I look around and see what we have done in the shortest space of time, from a whole burden of oppression, we've made it. And I don't think that we actually understand what way we have shaped in the world. I was a Minister of International Relations, and when I got to the United Nations, they turned around because I was from South Africa. It made me so, so proud. We don't know, sitting here, just what an impact we've made. That is the land of Nelson Mandela, that is the land of whatever it is, that is the land that will give birth to a new generation, etc. I want to encourage our students here to please stay on the course, stay at the university, and provide us with the kind of leadership that only you will be able to provide. Because the world turns. The world turns, and as it turns, it needs new ideas, it needs new impetus, which it can only get from yourselves. Thank you for having us here. Thank you for the space you've given us, and we hope that we'll go along this path with you for a very long time. Our statistician general here has been trying to educate me about 1, 2, 3, and it blows over the head. But he has promised us that he will provide us some statistical data for the magazine of the university. Have I got you right? Oh, okay, I'm committing on his behalf. Because that seems to be the new agenda of the world. If you want to follow the new agenda of the world, go into the statistics of it. And this man is growing bald every day because of the numbers he's dealing with. But he's providing us with the kind of direction that we need to take, especially for the younger generation. Thank you very much for having us. Thank you. We're extremely honored, and I hope that the relationship we have with you will go on. And I'm hoping that the researcher in Date Padi will deviate from statistics and produce a journal that covers perhaps some of the issues that we're dealing with, to make sure that we are not losing track of where we come from and where we're going to. And to all of you, thank you so much for responding to our call to be here. It means a lot to us to interact with you, to be able to say to you, you matter so much to us. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mayor Lindiwe Sisulu. The choir is back, and let's thank you for your earlier performance and the performance that's starting now. We're going to enjoy them. And let's mingle about and exchange numbers, network, share views, reflections on what transpired here this afternoon. And let me thank the university as well as the Sisulu Foundation for Social Justice for inviting me to be part of the proceedings here this afternoon. I really enjoyed listening to all the speakers presenting their views and reconnecting me with some of them here. So, and I'm going forward, I know, I always like to pick up on an idea and do something with it going forward. So I've got several topics that I'll be covering post what transpired here. Kalebo Habahai, so thanks very much for being with us this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you.